Okay. Hello, everyone. My voice finds you again in this moment. And so I wanted to speak about something I found very interesting, and I feel intuitively it is time to speak about it. As a disclaimer, there may be cough noises, there may be pauses, there may be the sounds of, background wind and whatnot, but if the concepts are found to be more interesting, it's as if I'm someone trying to paint a picture, and it's the picture is more important than the canvas, the brush, and anything else. So to dive into it, this sentence arose to me: mankind is truth's greatest companion. And so recently, in my observations of reality and how I have approached reality, I would say that similar to Hegel's view, Hegel's dialectical process, I have found this synthesis, and excuse my pronunciation, but I have found a synthesis in certain approaches I've had, and pretty much I'm going to explain right now what I mean. So first things first, we have to consider the starting point of reality. Now, the cool thing about human life is that every person's mind, which is the presence, let's say the light of their experience, the spotlight of their experience, every person's mind is in some sense the starting point of their own sense of existence to themselves. I started personally from a perspective where I was wondering about what is the value of an individual in a collective system. Then I shifted towards a view where I'm like, okay, what is the value of the collective to the individual? And now I have come to a very profound realization that we're not here to advance as just human beings, but in some sense to be a human who notices advanced being. There's this I was pointing to it, this idea where something I have been subconsciously or unconsciously doing in these Mr.Within talks, but then I realized that Hegel has a view on it. Okay. There's this view of how would I say this? Alright. Okay, first I'll get into the talk and then I'll draw parallels to this, Anytime I'm explaining what I'm going to do is time to wonder about what to do. Pretty much, I have this view. The intent behind this episode is that what is the limits of the human being? What is the human being here to do? And more than just what the human being is here to do, what can the human being do? I noticed that human beings are showing compassion to human beings. We're learning that as a species. For the longest time, our species was like a sort of savage animal, that didn't have enough, and so it had to bite its way towards its excuse me. It had to bite its way towards its own confirmation of value. It occurred to me that what if the human being has an ability to communicate not just with people, not with itself, let's say, but to communicate with the dimension, with the world. When I was younger, it's funny, ideas evolve over time. When I was younger, my perspective on spirituality was like this ambiguous soul that is moving the mind and the body. As if there's a sort of spirit, a sort of ghost, like ethereal, rendition of the person, Pretty much, I had this notion that the soul was a sort of ghost, something similar to a ghost. But later on, that view shifted and it changed to me realizing that what the soul is the activation of potential. And the potential is boundless. Think of it, the potential of the being is limitless. But the actualization of the being is limited. So what used to be a soul, a sort of Casper movie, turned to me into a sort of ability of the world. Now we are left as individuals. That means a person can sit down, think that they are, the oneness of reality and all of this, but they're going to realize that their biological existence is still here. And for let's say a person who entertains a transcendental position to their own conscious being, to have a body is not to be the body, or to be the body is to have a body. For someone who has found an interest into a recognition that some part of their intelligence is watching the whole moment, regardless of what part of the moment it feels it is or thinks it is. And if a person has a body, it's a sort of idea where it's as if, imagine you had a telephone in your hand, you had something that had the capability of ability, Sometimes it's like, a person sits in the car. Imagine somebody sitting in the car and sitting in the car so long that they forget that they are inside the car, but the car is still there. It's a suggestion that the vehicle has a sort of ability, has a sort of potential. I see the metaphor where in some sense it's as if like my biological existence is like a phone in my hand. You know, imagine somebody's holding a phone in their hand. Imagine an attributeless presence of space is holding a phone in the moment. So the developing view from this is that what's the point of us or the moment having access to this technology that is our biological existence? I have come to the conclusion that at least for this phase of history, give it the next 100 years, the major intent of not just nature but the whole cosmic opportunity is excuse me. The opportunity is communication. That means it's as if they're think of it. How do I say it? 4.5 billion years of evolution, and this creature has a mouth, and it has ears, and it has an inner dimension, and it has an outer dimension, and the inner dimension is separate from the outer dimension. So we're again this idea that there's 8 billion private versions of the world behind our eyes, but there's one version of the world where we're all in. Right now I'm saying, okay, why this unique circumstance where the creature has a mouth, it has ears, right, and it has a hidden world behind its eyes, and it's like wondering about what is the meaning of reality, right? What should we do here, right? And for the longest time, our communication tends to be used for our own survival. Right now, poets were different. Certain writers, certain human beings, or even artists, you can say, right? They were not, in some sense. Sometimes a force already knows the cause. There's an awareness of the causal position. Sometimes it's like sometimes a person does something and they know why they're doing it. Sometimes they just do it because the feeling is there. There isn't a sort of structure of reason behind why they're doing something, right? What I'm trying to point to is that I am considering the ability of the human being to communicate and the geometry of the human being positioned in a format to communicate are clues that there's something important about communication that the species has to go through. Okay? Now, when we wonder about the communication of the being, if we go far back in time, what do we notice? We notice that the environment... I should probably change this alarm ringtone. Okay, there we go. What I'm trying to say is that there's something significant about the role or about communication, right? And when we look at earlier in history, we find that the creature didn't have enough consciousness and self-awareness, so the environment's communication was becoming the creature. The environment moved us before we could move ourselves, pretty much. So in some sense, the world was communicating to the creature. Now the creature has an ability to communicate to the world from a sort of unconscious movement of existence. We have come to a conscious movement of existence, and the word we give for conscious existence is experience. We have become entities that notice that they are existing. This is very profound, and at the same time it's profound because we don't just notice our own existence, we notice the relationships that keep our existence present. Now, what I found very interesting is that we can choose to see a sort of dualistic position where basically what is going on the planet, there's a self in a world. Okay, the world was moving the self. Now the self has a privilege to move a small part of the world, which is itself. Now, I thought about communication. I thought about, in some sense, okay, what is the extent of the ability of the human being to communicate? And I noticed that human beings have communicated to each other, they have communicated to lesser species, even people have communicated to objects. You know, some people may think this is ridiculous, but if you look at a lot of you know, mystical traditions, religious traditions, shamanic traditions, there was a relationship of man's mind with itself through objective phenomena, but also through subjective phenomena. Now, I thought about, okay, let's say there's a sort of evolutionary chart for how advanced the communication of a creature can be in the realm. And this is really the fruit of this episode, the essence of this episode, where I was like, wait a minute. What if mankind can communicate to a dimension, to a world, right? We think we're in the world and the world is lifeless. This is like the thesis, right? I didn't really explain the Hegel's dialectical process well, but pretty much what it is it's a cycle of duality of it's like a spiral of duality endlessly growing, so geometrically, giving it a metaphor. But what it is Hegel is this dude in history, this very profound German philosopher, and he pretty much says there's a thesis, there's a sort of claim or postulate or some sort of a statement on reality, and then years later after that statement there comes an antithesis. Somebody says the opposite of that, and civilization and the progress of reality goes on to a pause, and then after some time another philosopher is born and comes and synthesizes both of those. Okay, so what it is like, think of it as if there's three philosophers in history, who the first one had, let's say, a good idea. The second one saw the opposite of that, had a sort of, let's say the first one had a positive idea, the second philosopher comes and gives a negative idea, counters that first person's perspective. Then there's a sort of halt in let's say the ideological ecosystem of the human mind, or that phase of history, or episteme, as Michel Foucault would say it, you know. A sort of conceptual spirit of the time, and then another philosopher comes and synthesizes these two, right? So it's kind of like first one side of the yin-yang symbol, then the other side of the yin-yang symbol, then a philosopher comes and puts both the yin and yang in one circle. Jesus Christ. Now, what's very fascinating is that the synthesis, you know, what the third philosopher does becomes very similar to, becomes a universe of its own as a sort of a thesis, and then another antithesis comes, and then some other philosopher comes and brings the synthesis. So what it is like thesis, antithesis, synthesis, the synthesis is seen as a thesis, and then again an antithesis comes, and pretty much it's as if what Hegel perceived in regards to what's happening with philosophers in history is that rather than philosophers being beings who just agree with one another, it's as if there's counter positions, and the counter position is resolved, and it's pretty much constantly expanding the context of the beginning idea, you know. one can make the statement that philosophers in history are communicating to each other as if similar to a collective being. I tend to have this view that I've had this for a while now, this view that what a philosopher truly is someone who is writing messages in a bottle and throwing it in the ocean so that the future generations will find it. You know, really what it is a true philosopher is speaking to the future. Now, it's like this view that communication has to be individual. Then there's this view that communication, let's say, or let me say it this way, it's an example. I'll give you an example. There was this Greek philosopher named Parmenides. He had this saying where he said everything is being, okay? And then after Parmenides, Heraclitus came around and said everything is becoming. And then after that, Plato came around and said, okay, it's not just things are being, things are becoming, but there may be actually two worlds, right? And then after that, Aristotle came and gave an antithesis to Plato's, let's say, synthesis. You know? You know, it's kind of like wondering communication can be in a static view, communication can be in a dynamic view, and then there's two dimensions where humanity communicates. The approach I like, if you know, this episode is kind of me trying to explain the imagery, a sort of vision that in the future I find that the advanced humanity will not just be communicating to human beings, it may not be communicating to either the visible or invisible other, but we will realize that the way to communicate to the world is to realize how we're being its communication. You see, there's something in reality where if a square wants to understand what a cube is saying, the square has to realize it is the cube or beyond. Okay? Right now, we are very convinced as creatures that we are in a world. That's it, right? We feel that the world, the outside, what is outside of our skin is different than what is behind, or I should say behind, but what I mean is that the outer experience and the inner experience are different. There's still that duality at work, you know. Any human being can say imagination is not real, but at the same time, why are we seeing the geometry of it? Why are we seeing when our eyes are closed? That's the question, right? And I feel that's a clue to how advanced human communication can be. Really, what communication is there is a neutrality of a conscious viewer, and then there's a view accepted, a sort of, it's like the moment the context is accepted, the concept can be selected or found in it, you know. When for example, for me, from a mystical position, I used to have this context that there's knowledge in the world, and I was like, man, you know, I can't read all the books in the world. I had a sort of context that knowledge was something I had to go out and get, you know. But then I realized that the world is unknown, and I realized that we're 8 billion creatures on a rock. At some point in the history of the world, we didn't exist in the world. The species didn't exist, and the moment we became conscious and we recognized there was a sort of language acquisition, you know. This even extends back to the first artwork of the human species, which was some, I don't know, early primitive being who put his hand on a cave and splashed like pigment, and threw pigment all around its hand and created a handprint on a cave wall, you know. So since that time, where the earliest artwork of the handprint on the cave is there, mankind has had an urge to communicate his inner realms to the outer realms. Now, the synthesis of these two, of the inner realms and outer realms, is complete worldhood, you know? To be a human being is to be a dualistic entity, and then to, in some sense, be the world is to realize you're a singular being. Now, to communicate to a singular being, it is impossible dualistically. You know, the idea of communication is different. The square trying to communicate to the cube must access simultaneously 5 other parallel lifetimes. Do you know? A sort of a format of human communication can be said to be compassion. Compassion is silent understanding. Or another way I could say it would be a sort of indirect telepathic care, self-care. That could be compassion. But really, it's as if this compassion of man extends to what he cares about, and if he cares about the nature of reality, that means imagine all the truth and falsehood, again being the yin-yang, and what is holding the truth and falsehood is the space of the world. And a species realizing that it's not that we can just communicate to positions of form, but what if the species one day will communicate to space? So what I'm trying to say is that it's as if it's like the question of the thesis of a being should exist, then the let's say antithesis of a being should in some sense experience. Then in some sense a sort of synthesis of there being a space for both existence and experience. Right now I am existing to my mind, and my mind is experiencing to my body, you know, is the experiencer to my body. When I think about in what ways I can communicate, to be honest, I have this feeling that speech and language is a very tiny, it's just the tip of the iceberg of how advanced the communication of the being we are can be. It's like right now we're this energy, let's say this ambiguous, this unknown energy, and this unknown energy is using language with its own innate biology. It's using the cognitive ability of language alongside with the biological ability of memory, and in some sense, knowledge is having a sort of relevance to an unknown world. I mean, really, we are in an unknown place. Who are we kidding? You know, the moment we can't see the edge of the world is the moment the unknown is encapsulating all human knowledge, right? To come to the unknown is when a person really realizes the value of philosophy, realizes the value of the history of what the human species and its mind has explored towards. It's like wondering about here. I'll set it up in the context of communication. Thinking life is at first an individual. The meaning of life is individual. Then thinking the meaning of life is collective. Then realizing that the individual and collective are always present. You know, they're present in space. The most advanced realization of the human life is to realize body and mind are simultaneously equally in the view of poetically soul. Kind of like you're neither just a mental being or a physical being when you can be aware of both simultaneously. The value of individual existence is a sort of self-communication. The value of collective existence, you know, it's the human being reaching such an advanced state where it's beginning to communicate with the world. You know, imagine somebody goes to a company and they have an issue with the company, and instead of contacting somebody on the side, they can contact someone, the owner of the company, directly, you know. And to me, it's like, imagine a human being wondering about how to communicate and suddenly realize how to communicate to different individual archetypes, and suddenly realizing if the individual communicates to the world directly, that communication to the world, in some sense, it encompasses all individual phenomena in it. You know, imagine somebody giving a talk not to people, not to a planet, but to the presence of all that is being the moment. You know, there was a time when I was younger, being raised in Iran, a theocratical society, I was like, what is the idea of prayer? And I realized prayer is speaking to truth, you know, speaking to God. And some people say meditation is listening to God. It's, you know, that's actually something that's said. Pretty much what I'm trying to say is that what is the value of consciousness if its attention, wherever its attention goes, its reality animates in accordance to. So if consciousness is this ability of the free will through the biological body to point and direct attention, and consciousness is wondering, what do I pay attention to in an infinite world? It's as if a moment is arising to the psychology where the individual is wondering, what is the value of my own individualism, and realizing it's dependent to how much they have understood their collective position of being. We have reached a point where the idea of the spirit of the individual soul is becoming slowly meaningless, and the idea of the collective spirit is becoming meaningful. Do you know, it is no longer the soul of one man, it is the soul of mankind, the spirit of mankind. What the spirit of mankind is that indirectly our individual lives, which may seem very small and mundane to us, you know, and people may feel like just a statistic, but in reality, it is like we are being the neurons of humanity's brain, you know. And anytime, like inventors, or there's any sort of creative activity, something in the domain of novelty happens on the planet, it's like the species' synapses are lighting up. You know, these Mr. Within talks, as much as I'm also saying that I'm speaking to the world and the species and all of this, sometimes it is also just for me to see my own ability, for me to see what I am in the moment also. That's the beautiful thing about mysticism, that truly when somebody wonders about truth, they realize their interpretation of the impersonal is indirectly personal. It's another way of saying, right now I am looking at a world, I have a world view, and this world view I feel, yeah, this is life, this is it, but it's like suddenly realizing that your eyes are not artificial, but your eyes are incomplete, you know? You know, imagine the definition of a simulation was an incomplete truth. Excuse me, to continue. What I'm trying to say is that I feel as a human being that I have reached a point where my consciousness is wondering, how do I communicate to space? And the idea follows that if somebody wants to communicate to space, the space of being rather than an individual doer in the moment, to communicate to the space, one must be in the same realism level as what they want to communicate. So in some sense, one has to discover their soul, not just embodied, but we should create a word here called enspaced. It's as if the person had like, let's say, imagine there were two spiritual people talking, spiritual person A, spiritual person B, and spiritual person A comes to spiritual person, imagine spiritual person B comes to spiritual person A and says, I had an out-of-body experience, man. And then spiritual person A says, oh, no way, man, I had an out of mind space experience. Now, what out of mind space means doesn't mean death. What it means is that one is wondering about the true texture of what their own intelligence is, and coming to the search, going through the journey of wondering actually what their intelligence is realizing that there is a moment in every person's consciousness where there is an instantaneity of attention to existence that is instant. It's as if there is an instant in consciousness interpreting itself, where there is no need for a secondary resolve of meaning. So it's as if somebody being like, how do I communicate to an embodied creature, right? We move our mouth. The evolutionary animal makes sophisticated mouth noises, right? Previous contexts of symbolism are accepted. And so suddenly meaning generates in the mind of, let's say, an physical individual wanting to communicate to a physical, like a physical being wanting to communicate to another physical being. But if we were to say, okay, if intelligence is not just limited to the brain and is actually a quality of how the world is present, as if truth being the intelligence of the world before the world was the world, the preliminary intelligence to how energy moved. So what I'm trying to say is that I have reached a point where I'm like, okay, let's say not now, but maybe in the future, how would our species communicate with space, with an intelligence of a space, right? That means pretty much I'm saying, imagine that space had a soul. And man, the soul in a body wanted to communicate to the spirit of a mind. The one does that is, the way one goes about doing that is realizing that it cannot be done as long as there is an individual movement in the space. It's like this, it's like a puzzle or some sort of riddle where we're like, okay, how can a visible entity that is identifying based on how the individualism moves communicate to that which is being intelligently space, and space surpasses anything in it. That's the whole point. It's as if the reason the idea of the soul exists, the reason people perceive the transcendental reality was not that they were savage animals and language was just becoming worlds for them so easily, with them being oblivious to it, but rather what seemed to be the journey of a creature in a world is actually the presence of a world animating in every moment, not in accordance to an individual soul and spirit, because I think most people have this view of karma where their karma is something that only happens to them. But really what it is like everybody is is simultaneously sharing the karma of the planet. Like really what Greta Thunberg was doing when she was crying out loud was trying to tell the species that there is a common denominator which is an important factor to the survival of our future, which is the point of life. Every human being, so many spiritual people in the New Age community, they think it's all about coming into the here and now. They think they have to be like ancient yogis, like in ancient times, they have to be like yogis who renounce samsara and the material world and completely be desireless. Like mysticism has a beauty, has a value, but in the outer realms, the greatest game of manifestation is happening, and there's an event happening, which is the force of life, bigger than any way the mind can contain. You know what it is? It's like, this is the beautiful thing about the world, that there's something happening with it that is so much more beyond a person's individual self-judgment. Imagine somebody suffering because of a view they have of themselves, and somebody suddenly, that suffering becoming meaningless when they realize that there is something way bigger than them happening, right? That's the profoundness of reality. You know, this is what the internet has, in some sense, the information age, confused the species by making it think that it had to only rely on its inner realms. Let me tell you, there's this saying in the, I've heard it from the Islamic tradition, but it's this phrase where they say there are no accidents. You know, to a religious man, nothing is an accident. And what the idea of God means is that you deserve every moment that happens to you, because it's not in your will, right? I remember seeing this incredible YouTube video where this girl on this TV show comes up to Muhammad Ali, this boxer, like the greatest boxer, and Mike Tyson agrees. You know, this Muhammad Ali, and the young girl was saying, are you like as good of a Muslim as you are as a boxer, something in these lines, right? And Muhammad Ali says to this young girl on this TV program where somebody uploaded the YouTube video, right? Muhammad Ali says, what does he say? He says, only God can know what's in the heart of every individual, so only God can know whether a person is being a good religious person or a bad religious person, because the point of religion is not attachment, it's detachment. The karma of any religious person who is trying to stay away from sin and desire is as if it's in some sense trying to be detached, right? What religion is renunciation. And I had this view where I'm like, because it's to be afraid is kind of natural in the human species. When human beings get old and they are alone and they are afraid, what happens to the mind? The mind for the first time wonders about a higher power, right? And I am saying in the future they may be the communication of it. You see, something is happening here where it's as if truth is moving the simulation in a way where the simulation can't know what the truth is, right? That's the challenge of mysticism. That's the beauty of not being a hunter of animals, a hunter of foolishness, but in some sense being a hunter of worlds. Imagine the hunter-gatherer, right? So we have this, let's say, like a film scene in your mind. Imagine the earliest tribes, right? Hunter-gathering tribes. What was it, right? People went out, they had a sort of headquarters as a tribe, and then they went out and they found opportunities and they brought the opportunities back to the tribe, and they were judged by the tribe by what they had brought. Which the same competitive spirit in capitalism was the same competitive spirit in hunters back in the day, you know? So we had hunter-gathering tribes, and now they were gathering, like, I don't know, berries and buffalo, hunting buffalo and gathering berries. Now I am wondering, in the future, what is the advancement of it? And even now I can say, right, sometimes I want to just shout out to you, and people don't realize how writers and futurist writers and science fiction writers were, I don't know how to tell you, but science fiction is the epitome of the intellect, because the intellect is measuring its ability in the moment, and the greatest ability, it's pretty much three sectors. You wonder about your ability in accordance to all that is your past, you wonder about your ability in accordance to what is present, and then you wonder about the ability of your future. The cool thing about the future is that in the future, the veil that is separating individual ability and collective ability is going to become more transparent, and what we're going to actually realize is that in the middle of trying to build this advanced human life, right, for the whole species, we're going to realize what the human being is a choice. This is the most bizarre thing about the concept of freedom, that freedom is a choice in a world. And that choice defines the world. That means if I choose right now to in some sense be a human being, I have literally changed the lens of the context of the world to only human understanding. But if I'm someone who sat down in nature and has just found a moment, or even on a bus stop or on the subway or whatever, right, where the person just finds a moment where they stop having any sort of intent for an unknown world. You see, this is like a sort of hilarious supernatural humility. The person, the way they saw the supernatural was not through a sort of empirical certainty where they're like, yeah, I saw the divine. But it's rather, do you know, the difference in character. You know, because it's in some sense that we are ultimately this force that is moving in the space-time continuum and has a capability to use its past journeys to try to familiarize itself with how in every moment of our life novelty is everywhere. You know, that means anybody who's had writer's block or anything, novelty is everywhere. You know, new ideas are found. It's like, think of it this way: there's infinite novelty, and man chooses to paint himself in whatever way he likes. Right? That means we limit ourselves, but the world seems limitless. Especially again when we can't see the edge of the world. It's like, what are we doing here? Where are we as creatures on a rock? How are we content that nowhere is nowhere? Do you know? How? This is my question to all philosophers on this planet ever to come. How are we content that in the middle of nothing our everything is spinning around itself? We are on a planet, okay? We are on, like, it's, to me that is so bizarre. You know, but I have to ignore the macrocosmic truth in order to condition my mind to fit into the micro cultural truth. Do you know? You know what it is? It's kind of like Tony Stark getting addicted to the Iron Man suit. Okay? Imagine Tony Stark got addicted to the Iron Man suit to such a degree that he couldn't stop using it. Why? Because it was freeing. It was as if he felt he could do things in the Iron Man suit that he couldn't do. You know? Outside of it. For me, really, I've reached a sort of metaphysics where every morning I wake up, I feel I'm logging in to how reality can consciously be administered. Literally, like, I wake up and my free will is the controller of the video game, of my own perception. Do you know? And then there is all the factors where it's as if like all our individual freedoms of expression leads to a scenario where it's hilarious. Human beings escaped the jungle, made civilization, but will realize soon that freedom means the recreation of the jungle. Like, we could have this view that the jungle, like the forest setting, without human civilization and unique unnatural behavior, are different than the environment's setting, you know? It could be the most advanced type of civilization where there is no civilization, right? But there's two, I've talked about this in other talks. There's a geometry to this idea, which is, if I explain now, it will shift differently for this talk. But what I'm trying to say is that the mysteries of reality, upon recognizing the unknown, it's like you're a human being who I'll say, imagine you had all the knowledge. Imagine you had read all the books on the planet. Imagine you had access to all the archives of knowledge online or whatever, everything, you know everything, every information and knowledge that the human beings had realized and uncovered and attained and discovered, you know, or invented. Imagine you knew this, and imagine all the greatest teachers in the world, all the greatest, all the, let's say, so-called enlightened beings, and all the holy men, and all the, truth emblems, and all of this. They all gave you their greatest wisdom. It's like greatest knowledge. It's like the person's like, all right, I'm a being that knows everything, so what do I do now? Right? This is why for a lot of people who have non-dual experiences, it becomes very difficult for them to be like, okay, how do I be a person now when I have experienced my sense of self as my whole moment, where my body is in. The body is a changing part of how the moment is being automatically is moving, right? A lot of our biological functions are involuntary. So I have reached this fascinating point where I am wondering, okay, there was a truth, there was a simulation, the synthesis of, wait a minute, truth and the simulation both being of content, regardless of natural, unnatural, are present in the same space. You see, that's the cool thing about mysticism, where the person realizes, or there's this branch of thought also called Mysterianism. And Mysterianism is where this sort of view on the world, where there's some things about ourselves that we will never know. Okay? So, mysticism, Mysterianism, it's very close to that. It's as if the person who has all knowledge suddenly wonders, what do you do with it? And the point is, the only thing that's left is unknown. Maybe the lifetime should be advised in an advanced civilization to be that 50% of the lifetime the person has to experience a known life. Okay? They have to be fascinated, like let's say they get educated, they are taught about all the type of knowledge in the world, but then there has to come a moment where the person has to acknowledge the unknown, because the greatest skill that every human being really subconsciously actually is looking for is the ability to confront the unknown, because that's where we're all headed. That's what death is. Death is the entrance into the unknown, but it is in some sense unnecessary, because one has to see what the natural play of reality is, right? That means before nothing, what was the point of everything, right? The mysteries behind the world are so bizarre that any person on the planet right now who is hopeless, let's say in anguish, they feel like they are lost, or the darkest night of the soul has had, I will tell you, there are question marks hovering in this world. They are waiting. The future is waiting for the present to find it. The greatest gift for consciousness is to realize that it has been waiting for how the energy of its being moves. So it's like the person being like, I'm an energetic being waiting for a savior archetype, waiting for something, realizing I am energy. Is it like, how can I tell you, there's ways we are happening as a being that has nothing to do with ideology, and is such instantaneous ways of being present that it's kind of like, it's very hard to say sometimes if a person has imagination, or imagination is another world they're in, and it's based on your discovery, your exploration. And I have this view that anything that has been said till the end of time, there could be endless spiraling angles to it. The fascinating thing about knowledge is that we have all acted like, we have understood each other, but really what it is that we are harboring worlds, and there is a hidden value to revealing, as if like the intelligence is here. Excuse me. Guys, can you imagine if I create a create an online course and call it, learn to communicate with your world, with the whole world, or communicate with space, and the course would just be this free, like 1 minute video, right, where I'm saying, just be present with the world and you will first, it's as if listen to your karma, and then you will be capable of communicating with any sort of interdimensional projection of intelligence one has subconsciously considered to reality. That means it's like the person who knew everything was no longer looking for anything. We are a species in the void, and the poetry doesn't get, more amazing than that. And if it does, it doesn't get, it's like there's different eyes that notice different worlds, or think of it this way, every conscious moment has a hidden nostalgia. It's like the echo, it's like hilariously an echo subconsciously wanting to be the original voice. There is a feeling of incompleteness due to the dualistic psychology of unknownism and knownism, as the future generations will call it. Many people don't realize philosophy and mathematics are kind of like twins, in the same way that geometry and language are twins. I have wondered about the potential of the advanced civilization, but I realized that man's energy, it's as if like life is like this endless escalator, and the person's view of each moment is at a certain height, at a sort of certain way of energetic composure. It's as if the mystery of what is looking out through our eyes is the ability to go towards all that it can see. You see, it's like what really knowledge is like, what do we do in that? That's pretty much knowledge, And then, how do we do something correctly? That's wisdom. Wisdom is always a better way the moment could have happened. Anybody who, let's say you're somebody who you think you're unwise, you just have to wonder what would another better way the moment happened would be like, But anyways, I'll walk towards the title again. When I say mankind is truth's companion, the intent I had behind this, where I was like, man, how many human beings suffer because of ideology, because of wondering how should our species approach the potential of the transcendental. Really what it is we were an unconscious singular organism, then we became a conscious dualistic experiencer of our existence, an experiential organism, right? And right now the species is stuck here. That means we identify with singular existence, and we identify with dualistic minds, and then we are afraid of the void, and we don't even know what infinity is, right? Like, that's where our species is. Our species has like has like half the room of the world discovered, but the other half remains. And how can we claim, right? To me, I feel there's something about knowledge. Like, let me tell you this: anybody who has seen, or anybody whose mind can visualize King Arthur raising the sword that no man could have raised until he pulled the sword, right? So it's as if, imagine that moment where King Arthur pulled the sword, and he suddenly knew that he was the one to pull that sword out of it. It's like to be the novelty bringer of the moment. That's really when archetypally King Arthur became king, when he did something no one could, right? And so when we wonder this about us as a species, right, it's like every person is actually waiting for their King Arthur moment, but they must realize, right, it has to do with the future. To build an advanced civilization is to guarantee an efficient future civilization, to guarantee poetically the immortal, the continuity of whatever this force that is moving us is. You know, the human species is unique geometry. You know, we think that extraterrestrials are fighting, you know, in this cosmos. Like there's like, you know, I remember reading in this new age website, you know, that there's like something like the Galactic Federation, and there's galaxies and sophistication and all of this, right? But in reality, we have not considered that to be an advanced being doesn't mean you're just externally advanced. It means you're also internally advanced, so their comprehension of a mind would take the being to a point where it can be anybody, any form in space, right? It's not the idea of a shapeshifter, right? But it's the idea that the person realized they're a field of being where at any moment their consciousness could express, right? So it's like the person first thought they had parallel lives, and realized if there was a consciousness that could hold, like, let's say, infinite lifetimes at the same time, that consciousness would be all those lifetimes. So what that means is it would be the soul of multiple worlds rather than the soul of just one world, you know. Because mankind has had a relationship with fear as an evolutionary entity, and because it has had a relationship with, let's say, salvation, the salvation psychology, whether the animal wanted pleasure rather than pain, right? Or whether the person wanted to go to heaven rather than hell, you know. It's like in pure honesty, reaching the unknown and realizing the value of the unknown is that when there is no the power of honesty is that there is nothing. You know, honesty is like looking at the stars with taking off your sunglasses when you're looking at the stars. That's what honesty is. You know, in some sense, the person simplifies the moment by reverting it to a sense of self where there is no doubt. You see, doubt comes from any person who doubts their ability. It's as if you're not being yourself. That's why, you know, there can be this argument made that human beings actually in every moment can be advanced, but they are their own barrier, right? They are their belief, their individual belief on a collective system can limit them, right? Right now, our minds are attached to the world as much as, you know, the world is, you know, present with our body, right? Sometimes I think about it's like, am I giving this Mr. Within talk, or is the whole world happening at once regardless of who is doing what? You see, instantaneously, the idea of the advanced civilization is there the moment the idea was in the inner realms. You know, I'm this person who's like, okay, before we can build an advanced civilization in the outer realms, or I'm like somebody, you know, who's like, I don't have the resources for now to like build an advanced civilization. I would love to do that. You know, that's kind of like why I'm sticking around in this world, you know. It's like the advanced civilization, the idea of the advanced civilization saved my life, right? And it saved my life because it made me care for the life of the future generations. That seems to me the greatest puzzle. That means a person just drops morality aside, and the person's like, what is the most fascinating thing to look at in this world, right? And they will come to realize it is how the moment is being a generation of meaning. the most fascinating things about the world are simultaneously being fascinating moments of our mind. We take ownership of our mind, but in actuality we are the presence of a space. We are an awareness, and there is different dimensions or phenomena in this awareness, right? That means it's like we are realizing the mind was like a coin, where in one side it was the projection of the body, in another side, the body was hilariously, the mind of a greater dimension. The square was the body for the mind of the cube, So what I'm trying to say is that human beings must practice. This is my vision for the, I don't know, of course I'm just 1 in 8 billion human beings talking, right? But I'm saying that if I did care for the future, how would that look like? And I have seen that, I have seen something in my inner realms where I can't say it's gonna happen, but it's like a geometrical probability that's there, right? Imagine an architect goes and sees this land, right? This space, and wonders what sort of building this architect can create. Pretty much what I'm trying to say is that in the, let's say, cultural psychology, in human history, when we look at different cultures and the different psychologies people have had in those cultures, we see that human beings have had a relationship with the unknown, and most human beings who function through ideological systems, they are choosing, they're literally it's like paying a gym membership, but instead paying a membership to be a linguistic entity. That means consciousness opted into being a character in a subjective story. It's like existence became a mind when it realized it could be. But what realized it could be was beyond the mind. So really what's going on here is that something unknown is moving the moment, and we are left to interpret it. Now we have interpreted thesis, antithesis till the end of time, right? And suddenly we realize, wait a minute, what if the point of the world is not to just see it, but to see beyond it? Why have we thought that the meaning of life is to accept shape in a changing world? It's like it's way beyond this. There's mysteries, there's experiences human beings are having where we don't have words for yet, right? And the future generations are not realizing that the contribution to the exploration of the world is the greatest task. That means if somebody told me, Mr.Within, what is the peak attribute of the greatest masculinity and the greatest femininity, I would say ultimately for any archetype, it doesn't matter if you're a buffalo who suddenly has consciousness, like some AI connect to its brain and has the consciousness of the human being. All creatures, the moment they notice themselves, they cannot ignore the world. After they notice the world, they communicate with the world, but in order to communicate with the world, one must be the world. So what I'm trying to say is that our free will notice the divine will, or nature's will, whatever context you like to see. And that's where, or even ancient Greeks saw it as logos, Socrates called it the inner the inner oracle, Human beings have had a relationship that has surpassed human relationship, and it has been a sort of relationship where the emotions are being based on what is happening to the world, which is another way of saying what is happening to your mind, right? Like a person could fear death and be like, oh my god, I'm not going to exist anymore. Like, a person looks at death and it's like, man, what is this? Right? But the person at the same time wonders, it's as if the destiny of the body is to suddenly go into a state of non-existence or whatever may happen, and then the mystery comes, what's gonna happen to them? It's like, what was the point of being conscious of a world if there's nothing else? Do you know that means consciousness can never explain itself because there is no meaning we can give to an instant. The secret of mysticism, spirituality, has been that an instantaneous awareness is an inconceivable presence of the moment. That means space has no beginning or end. It is like being was being before anything could be. It's a realization that our minds are not just local. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, if you are a New Age person, you may think that your psyche is sponsored by like some, galaxy or something. Can you imagine? It's like, all right, the inner realms for today's episodes are sponsored by the Andromeda Galaxy. It's like, welcome to the podcast, everyone. But what I'm trying to say, it's like people have been trying to, find reasons beyond themselves to explain themselves, not realizing this instantaneity of how one is being. There's a supreme, mysterious aura to it that no man can literally explain an instant. It's like, how did I feel instantly? Like, there's no, instantaneously, there is no emotion. If somebody tells me, what's your opinion of the world in an instant? It's like, there's nothing I can say, because in an instant, reality is it just is. Right? That's the cool thing about our world. Like, if we close our eyes, we have to imagine stuff, but when we open our eyes, oh my God, well, who imagined this? It's like reality is free imagination. You don't have to imagine the shapes are there. The attention, it already is finding itself in what would the term be, sort of predisposed contextual geometry in the world. This is really the cool thing about knowledge, where the more a person knows, the more selfless they become, because they are seeing how many different ways the self can move. So it doesn't have to be defined by only one format, right? The freedom of our eyes is not in some sense just what we saw in the lifetime, but how far we saw. That means imagine there was no good and bad, there was just efficiency and inefficiency. But this inefficiency, its definition was efficiency being the acknowledgement of more dimensions in the moment, inefficiency being less. Right? And when I say more dimensions, I'm pretty much saying, like, what can any teacher in an unknown world say? Go figure it out. The educational system could be redesigned where it comes to, like, it's like, how would I tell you? It's like there's infinite problems to solve, and it's important to be aware of how the past found a solution, but the future requires us now. We are the conscious free will, the conscious agent in the moment. When a person realizes that, their relationship with divinity becomes instantaneous. If you're a person who comfortably moves your body, you have trusted your body, you have trusted existence. If you're someone who has very good reflexes, right, or it's easy for you to move in space, right, it's as if there's a sort of trusting of being this space. Like, this might sound strange to the viewers, but when I give these talks, like, before I even talk, like, how I get the steam engine of the inner realms going, regardless of what sort of firewood burns, But what it is in some sense a fascination with an unsolved problem, It's like, to me, women are very beautiful, but also unsolved problems are incredibly beautiful. Do you know what I'm saying? That means there's, like, what's the point of attention being here? What is the meaning to the shape that is able to do something now? In the future, it's like, imagine any person that is too quiet, gets a... Okay, never mind. I want to say gets a fee, like a penalty or something. Why? Because the species must trust its world to activate its ability. That's the secret. Anything you trust, you find ability in. Anything you distrust, you're like subconsciously the person's trying to get out of there. Do you know? Do you know? Imagine somebody like playing piano and not knowing how to play a song properly, right? And at some point, just getting off the piano, you know? So, anyways, where I'm going with this is that mankind's psychology is realizing there could be something beyond dualism, a sort of free multidimensionalism or new ways of looking at the dimensions of the world that have never been seen before. Do you know, sometimes I don't know if religious institutions realize, or any ideological system that's trying to collectively hold everything, right? It's like at some point we're going to realize we're missing out on all the different ways we could look at the world if we just look at the world in one way. So what's the point of life if it's like this endless film, right? You know, it's as if, why is there a mind moving a body, right? It's not just for the body to move. The mind has an essence, energetic essence-based relationship with being. Usually, I feel at least, you know, the species could be, you know, experiencing psychologically a percentage of the species, I'll say, where they don't know how to relate to divinity, okay, for those who consider it, right? And how you relate to divinity is by finding the simplest moment of your psyche where you could still trust the world. And when you find a moment you can trust, it's as if you've allowed the possibility of reality to happen. You know, my challenge as this whole Mr.Within archetype is trying to get the species to trust how advanced the future can be. Our species is just getting started. Our species is like a designer in the void about to design the most advanced performance of a species, you know, performance of evolution. We don't realize that the information age converted the habitual patterns of the mind of the biological animal. We're no longer just a pure biological animal. We're a biological animal where a linguistic language, like a program, has interfered, right? But its interference was unique, and its interference was strangely also a privilege, right? That means it's not just, for example, a mystery how the Earth is not so close to the sun, you know, to get burned and housed. It's not so far away to, in some sense, there being cold temperature issues. The same way, why is there an ability, why is consciousness being the observer of its own force? Man has different relationships with the world. What I have realized is that, I'm a person who, when I go to temples, like, I take off my shoes and I just pause before I enter the temple or any mosque or whatever, right? And I just acknowledge the presence of the moment, and then I go in, right? It's like acknowledging the spirit of the moment and then animating. But at some point I realized that where is the purity in the divine? The purity of the divine is within the purity of the mind itself. You know, they say God created man. Simultaneously, we have an unknown witnessing consciousness through free will, creating a sense of self. I feel that God is an incredible metaphor for awareness. To a solipsist, their mind is their own god. To somebody who, let's say from the religious archetype, there's a submission, right? In mysticism, they renounced even the language for truth, you know. Like mystics are beings that they're acknowledging there being a mysterious way the world happens that language can't contain. So if language cannot contain truth, man's eyes are the connection to the divine, the direct experience. It's like, you know, a kid, you know, raised in a religious society being like, am I me looking out right now from my eyes, or am I God looking out through my eyes? Because my eyes, my awareness is the only thing that has been from the beginning of my life noticing that I am existing and changing. There's ways as a human being I have changed that the world has never seen, you know, and we're all like this, right? That's why I'm saying the inner realms is like a private server, a private universal server, and the outer realms is a public universal server. Imagine like a multiplayer online game where every player gets to see his own screen, but other players don't see each other's screen, right? But they're all being in the same world simultaneously. So mankind is going to realize, okay, if there is a known intelligent being, could there be a possibility there's an unknown intelligent being? For the mind, this seems to be a great puzzle to solve. Right now, at the same time, the species is slowly moving. Like right now, like, how would I say it? Right now, we're fighting over traditional, let's say, conservative and liberal values of what the human archetype should be, right? You know, but the future, it's going to be the addition of dimensions. That's the whole point of discovery. And ever since we could record history, something has happened, right? Back in the day, historians couldn't read other historians' history books, right? But now all historians can read, you know, like the information is accessible to all. Like the information age was a sort of interconnection of the eyes of the species with itself. We are living at that time in history where we have to we have to advance reality. We have to merge our inner realms so that we create an opportunity for the future generations to realize that life is not a truth or falsehood, but it's more kind of like activate or don't activate. This is like really where poetically the soul's choice, you know. There's something here where I give it a name. I call it me. I could call it a mean. I could have chosen it, you know. It could have been any other name, right? But that's what I have. That's the sticker I have connected and put on my third eye, you know, since childhood. You know, the name and the personality and the linguistic livelihood. It's like living in. It's like noticing you're living inside language, the same time that the world is living outside of that language. So, to be honest, the strategy, the vision behind the title, Mankind is Divinity's greatest companion, is that mankind should not fear the potential of intelligence and greater dimensions, but should realize that if we think we are alone, and if there is something else, then it's as if a gratefulness that there is something else. You know, that means we are not just in an empty box. There is something else. This is why human beings not just go towards religion, but they begin to realize that there is a dimension to our experience of life that is not limited by image. It's another way of saying the observer is not the observed. If the observer has gone to notice, you know, reality change. What spirituality means. Is that the eyes were open before language could have opened them. Mankind shouldn't fear unknown intelligence. We should treat ourselves as a walking companion. That means it's like, even if there's like, let's say, I don't know, let's say hypothetically peaceful, enlightened extraterrestrials land on the planet from the Andromeda galaxy, imagine, right? I've written something like this in my science fiction, that's what I'm sharing, you know. What I'm trying to say is that our ability to communicate with greater dimensions is dependent on how we acknowledge those greater dimensions, and if we can discriminate what are we putting into the moment and what was in the moment before there was any sort of modification. Right now, me speaking and giving this talk, it's as if I'm using language to modify an inner film, right? It's literally what I'm doing when I give these talks. Is like, my mind is like a film, and I watch it and then I vocalize it, you know. The ancient sages would say that there's pretty much two things a person can do in life. They can either trust it or distrust it. Right, so we have an option of distrusting life and being like, it doesn't mean anything, you know, there's nothing to trust, you know, I don't even trust myself, you know, how can I even trust the world, you know? Right, so it's like, there's this issue, like the person has distrust, but then distrust doesn't go anywhere, and conscious energy is going to be like, what am I doing here if I'm distrusting what I'm seeing and being, do you know? So in some sense, doubt never made sense. Self-doubt has never made sense. It's actually, I think, it's like it doesn't make sense, the concept of self-doubt. Because the self is dependent on, it's like the mind is using an awareness to the world, and then an awareness to the self, and then into moving the self that way. But the mind is being aware of the world regardless of the self. Right, like that means it doesn't matter if the biology is an antenna, the signal is being received, something is noticing the value of changing movement. Right, it's like the meaning of life is to like look at change, because why else would the world be changing? Do you know? So it's our ability to convert change into efficient collective strategies, which is another way of saying living an individual life. That is, imagine an individual victory and a collective victory, a win-win situation. If we could find, I am terming it the advanced communicator, right? Like that's the archetype I'm trying to use. I'm not like, like, you know, I'm pretty much looking at spiritual people, religious people, secular people, you know, different types of people on the planet, and saying, guys, we're all communicating. If we choose to put it in the context that these are all forms of communication rather than specific truths, right? It's as if our minds are artwork, our beliefs are artwork, but when we take this artwork, when we try to make our mind the world, it's like, you know, it's like evil people have known their karma before it happens, you know. The nature of man is to have faith in what it is being. All the prophets, you know, I would make such a bold claim and say all the prophets in human history, in any culture, any time, whatever, all the prophets were preaching that truth is here and truth can be. Religion is pointing to truth, but that truth is a faith in the inconceivable, which is not a concept. Do you know? I remember coming across something in, I was reading the Islamic holy book, and I had this sort of, I got this view where I'm like, God is inconceivable, but we are choosing a name for it. Do you know what I'm saying? That means it's as if God has no partner, like in let's say religious, in one culture of a religious context, right? God is inconceivable. Nothing can replace God, but the concept of God is replacing God. You know, it's kind of the strange thing where to have faith in God is very different than to believe in God. Having faith in God is like trusting the unknown. Believing in God is making the concept of God a replacement for the actuality of an inconceivable creator. Do you see what I'm saying? Us even giving the verb creator to the creator is a sort of humanization. It's a sort of shaping, right? It's as if truth is something that man didn't need to do anything to realize. It just had to realize how what was being was being. And I'm saying when mysticism may become more fascinating for the future generations, I've envisioned it that one day these Mr.Within talks are like, you know, people are going to discover it. Like the whole species is going to discover it at some point in the future. And when that happens, I hope to see a resurfacing of a sort of mystical urge, right? An urge in the human being to be like, what's the point of the mind? Acknowledging additional dimensions without wondering what the potential of those additional dimensions of reality can be. Pretty much there's four ways, or four views our mind can have. We could look at reality and be like, it's nothing. We could look at reality and be like, okay, the truth of reality is everything. We can look at reality and be like, okay, truth is this endless cycle of chaos and order. We're inside some strange, you know, roller coaster, you know, from chaos to chaos and order, just endlessly dancing, right? But then there's another view where this is the presence of infinity, right? So there's something about duality that points to the infinite, which is another way of kind of saying like it's duality times duality times duality ad infinitum, right? So when a person realizes, wait a minute, is chaotic and ordered things happening till the end of time? Is the universe changing? Is the periodic table constantly reorganizing itself, behaving in a certain way, and then returning back to a sort of meaningless elemental continuity? You know. What I'm trying to say is that to any human being, the spirituality of the future is us not only embracing the ability of our species, right? There's going to come an honor which is now absent in 2022. You know, anybody on the planet tells me they're being honorable in 2022, I'll be like, get out of here, you know? Because there's a type of honor, which is the honor of just realizing that all of our individual lives is a lifetime of a species. The species is like a collective being. Okay, it's like the closest way man had managed to contact the invisible other by becoming him. It's like the human species is like a bowl of water, right? Or a pond, and imagine it's raining on the pond, okay? And every raindrop is like a new human being born and suddenly emerging as an effort of the species, right? Because there never was stupid or smart people if we fail. If the species fails, if there is a discontinuity, whether through inner extinction or outer extinction. Inner extinction is forgetfulness of our progress, into our mind's progress, and the stoppage of it, right? And external extinction is like, yo, somebody break that asteroid, somebody call Superman, you know, that's an external. You know. You know, it's like if an asteroid was to hit Earth, scientists would be like, we're not Superman, but we got some ideas, you know? That means scientists are guardians of the external realms, philosopher of the outer realms, and philosophers are the guardians of the inner realms. Philosophers care for the mind of the species, right? And the mind of the species is the quality of its presence and how it enters the future. This might sound bizarre, but when I think about what death would be like, I think it would feel like a portal. You know, it's a portal experience. You know. You know, we don't have fear of the mind. The mind, fear is from the pain of the body, or the dismissal or something. The absence of the body leads to fear. But for the mind is not an object and it knows it. The ego knows that the body is non-fiction and it is fiction. Right? Consciousness knows that it's being a mind simultaneously as there's a body. So it's all about interacting with the unknown beyond the individual archetype. The whole species goes into explorer mode, right? And we realize that truth has nothing else. Like check this out. If we are the truth, truth was always here. If we are the simulation and there is a truth, truth is no longer alone. God, it's like another way of saying we are God. God has something to watch when the human exists. Do you see? We are the greatest companion of the potential of unknown intelligence. Mankind makes no sense to fear an unknown world because we don't know what is behind the unknown. We don't know what's behind the veil, you know? Somebody in the chat section says, it looks like Attack on Titan. Yeah, the reason I chose this picture for this episode, because this is a character in the storyline where this character is very intelligent, but this character is a coward, you know? And at some point, when he realizes his ability, this character has a saying in the show where he says, I can feel courage flowing through me, as if courage was not something that is from the past or just the future. It's the presence. It's something. It's like the energy that moves the present, you know, before the world moves. Literally, it's like a chess game between I move, world moves. It's like I do something karmic. It's like I create a cause, then the world shows me the effect of that cause. Do you know? What I'm trying to say is that it makes no sense to distrust vision, because vision has there's no premise before the first premise of real knowledge, you know? It's like there was no story before we created words. And you know, when people go for a walk, imagine 8 billion species, they're all walking companions, you know, they're all like living companions of just how consciousness is existing. Do you know? Our compassion means we're choosing to understand before we judge. Our cruelty means we have judged before we have judged before we could even care to understand. Man has to realize every person just has to look for themselves, of course. You know, this frees one from getting enslaved by the outer realms when they realize they are the pilot of their eyes. You are the pilot of your consciousness. This is, think of it as the highest teaching. Why? Because then when the known has created an artwork, the unknown moves the brush. Metaphysics is mankind true, like the metaphysics of the future is mankind realizes we are not language. And you know, teachers are going to be like, what do we teach now? You know, the species evolved beyond identifying with language, rather than trying to feel we are our communication, to realize that the moment is in presence and the world moves through it as we do. Like right now, my archetype, the archetype of my psychology, speaking to you right now, who I am, is someone who, like a week from now, my perspective is going to be different. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that's how the mind can move. It can move in ways we haven't known before. To build an advanced civilization is an outer strategy. To advance communication is an inner strategy. To advance civilization means to continue the natural biological organism. The advanced civilization is a declaration that till the end of time, the species deserves its freedom, deserves its position in the void. You know, humanity is the advanced civilization of humanity is the greatest headquarters for, let's say, a multidimensional space. Dash being, you know. To take this to the idea of compassion. Compassion is solipsistic to some degree. We can't ignore that. You know, that means it is self-assumed. But at the same time, compassion is what the liberated being can do. Compassion is like just like there's like an Xbox achievement unlocked, compassion is like this sort of achievement unlocked where the person is realizing, just like many different flowers deserve to exist in the garden, many different ways of intelligence moving on the surface of the earth deserve to exist. Like human beings, they start wars with one another, but why don't we go start wars with parrots in jungles? Right? Why don't we go start wars with penguins? You know, like why? Because we are entertaining a level of abstraction, you know, where all the other species on this planet is like, what are these monkeys doing? You know, are they pouring concrete in our habitat? Like, you know. You know, I think sometimes for a human being, for animals and nature, to see a human being is kind of like to see an alien, you know. I think animals and nature that attack, you know, human beings is because the human being is behaving so differently, right? Let's say a panicking human being is going to look like an extraterrestrial activity to the hilariously metaphoric terrestrial mind of the bear, you know. You know, in this show, Shingeki no Kyojin, where this picture is from, there's a character called Erwin Smith, which is this kid's mentor in the story, right? Is this kid's, like, archetypal teacher. This character called, I think, Commander Erwin Smith, this character, there's a scene where all the soldiers, this kid's not there in the scene, but that commander, it's like the last scene of his character being in the storyline. There's a sentence in the show where the soldier, they're all about to die, the soldier says, is it all meaningless? And the commander says that it's not meaningless because we live for those who will discover the meaning one day, something in those lines. You know, we're not just living for the potential of ourself. When we realize we're living for the potential of a species in the void, it's a game changer. It's an archetypal game changer. It's like we suddenly realize where all the polymaths in history got their inspiration. Because in one lifetime, how far can human vision go? That is the greatest game to play. You know, and its poetry is that it leads beyond worlds. Like, there's so many unexplainable stuff in the visible universe, and we're like, oh my god, even our mind that is interpreting the visible reality is invisible. It's as if we don't know there's a mystery to consciousness, but we're thinking that reality is something specific. Like, do you see what I'm saying? It's like we don't know what the mind is, but we're using the mind to be certain that there is something here, right? It's kind of like, before we know what we are, what can we be? And this is really, you know, the urge towards metaphysics, where the person is like, okay, I see how the physics works, you know, to some degree. You know, there's so many different ways stuff is physically as phenomena happening in the world. But as Immanuel Kant was fascinated by, he had this term he called noumenon, right? And the term noumenon meant two inner events that would happen, you know. Every philosopher is like a human being, and they are awakening from the dimensions that the human being is being in, right? So it's like, as self-awareness increases, the self recognizes its codependence with the world. So the geometry of your mind is simultaneously being also the geometry of how the world happens. So the person inevitably, through the path of intellect, Raja Yoga, right? In some sense, they reach a point where they come to the unknown, and the unknown brings forth a sort of humility where we begin to wonder about the emotion of the moment, not just the ideology, shape, and films of the moment, but at where and why the emotion is there at that time. Like, do you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not just having thoughts, but wondering why those thoughts are there, right? And you suddenly begin to notice, okay, it's not just the physical game, and it's not just a non-physical game, but it's something where both dimensions are accessible. Like a bird has two wings to fly, you know, we have a poetically, you know, an infinite invisible potential of mind, and a sort of finite visible body, you know. Existence could be perceived from a metaphysical context, a philosophical, through the branch of metaphysics, of philosophy. It can be perceived as, in some sense, an era of worldhood, right? It's like, what I'm trying to say is that where do we draw the line of the value of our individualism in a world which is unknown, right? To some degree, it's the best guess that we're working with right now. You know, some things empirical can be verified, but some things at the same time, there's optical illusions. The person's like, I gotta see it to believe it, but then they go to a magic show, right? And it's like, okay, what did I just see, right? So it's like, sight is not just based on seeing to believe. It's the ability of that which is looking through your eyes, where it's the significance of how the spirit of the moment moves. So when you notice the uniqueness of how there's anything at all in a world, you suddenly start from this simple level where you're not even any archetype, right? The person thought being a fool was humble, and then suddenly realized, you know, it's like there's something simpler. That means truth is being. If it exists as a concept, regardless of if the simulation is true or false to itself. You see, it's another way of saying there are so many hidden storylines to what could actually be happening, but it's up to man's mind to envision those. And really, the greatest thing about the educational system is like that. I thought of like, how do we bring a sort of great convergence of passion all over the planet. It's like human beings are being these containers of energy, right? And what's the point of being an energy in the realm, right? Is it just a self-witnessing of individual life, or could the individual life have been used for a collective vision simultaneously? That means double victories. That means one is not just seeking a victory in the inner realms, right? Or a victory in the outer realms. One is seeking a victory in both realms. Sometimes I was born in Iran, and recently in the news there's been protests and whatnot, heartbreaking events taking place. But I thought, like, man, the dictator or the person in power is choosing to in some sense externally have, right? That means it's as if like there's an inner life and an outer life, and our decisions have an implication to both. Okay, but somebody who's being a dictator or a tyrant, right? That's kind of like the person's inner life not having a good destination, right? And the only solution could just be compassion. That means sometimes I think what the United Nations needs is in some sense a sort of a grander universal etiquette, What is the metaphysics for? What is the metaphysical for? And what's the point of attention in a changing world? Like, this is something where, some part of, like as long as we have free will, life is like something we have to give it meaning. We have to give the meaning to. It's kind of like what I'm saying is that human beings have treat themselves as a thought, okay? And what a thought is a storyline. There's a context to it. And imagine you are a person who you suddenly realize what freedom for the mind could imply. Not just freedom for the body, but freedom for the mind, what that could imply. Was to realize that from the simple, honest position of how the moment is being caused, if a person has that trust in the simple, instantaneous, causal position of their moment, once you trust the simple, you don't fear the complex. Life actually turns around. Right now, people are trying to be complex, right? And complexity is to some degree just the ability. How would I say it? It's what I'm trying to say is like we have complex problems, but if the problem solver reverted from that complexity to the simplicity of the moment, a reversion to the original simplicity of your own being, right? And then you chose to entertain the unknown, then it becomes beautiful, it becomes fascinating. Better than the word beautiful, fascinating. That means there is something so beyond what we think the human being has to be now in history that the future generations are all giggling. The unborn future generations are giggling because of how much our species is freaking out in 2022 based on the storyline of abstraction. It has masked and personalized itself. So I'm saying that it's pretty much like when you notice the unknown, a part of your soul relaxes. Like the moment's just the tenseness of the moment, and the person's like, oh, okay, it's unknown. Then the expectation on knowledge becomes how you have experienced this unknown. For me, I was a kid who had the idea of the soul, mind, and body around. Okay, that idea was so early on. I was aware of it. I could have a distinction, right, between these three. I could notice those three archetypes, and I had found a way to see it through myself, but I didn't understand it when I was young. You know, it's like when I was young, I was unconsciously understanding myself, but it's like now I can see how in those unconscious moments, close to my conscious moments, those moments were, you know. It's like realizing not just the mind can look at infinite things if it had the hypothetical ability to do so, but the mind can be infinite, right? Can you imagine a human being, they ask him, what kind of being are you? And the person's like, I'm an infinite being, buddy. You know, I'm infinite. I am infinity even. You know, imagine somebody who's, you know... Imagine, you know, two beings trying to show off to each other. One of them's like, you know, bro, I can live longer than all the other human beings. And the other one's like, buddy, I'm an infinite being, you know? Dear viewers, what I'm trying to say is that the species has ignored its metaphysics. It has caved itself, literally, like this show Attack on Titan. Humanity is inside these giant walls of language. These languages, philosophers have come and tried to wonder. You know, it's like sometimes you can't help someone, but you can show them something new. You know? When I say mankind is truth's greatest companion, I am saying any archetype of the invisible other is grateful for humanity's presence. You know, imagine in the future extraterrestrials wanted to invade us, right? But they were talking, like they could communicate, right? And imagine like some philosopher was walking in a park and an extraterrestrial, this is a hypothetical, you know, sci-fi story I'm creating right now. I'm saying imagine some philosopher was walking in the park and suddenly, right, an extraterrestrial in the future landed and said, hey man, we're going to invade your species, right? And the philosopher was like, wait a minute. You know, wait a minute, why do you want to invade our species? And imagine the extraterrestrial says something in the lines of, yeah, I don't know, resources, it's valuable for us, something like we have to, we're evil or whatever, do you know? And imagine the philosopher says, you are invading us from one side of a coin. You don't see what's behind the other side of the coin. That the potential the species has to be present in the universal sector would be the greatest companion to all conscious entities. That's what the advanced civilization would be, so advanced, right, that even if there were other beings, you know, it's like they could, you know, rest in the earth, airport, you know, airport earth, you know. So we ask ourselves, how necessary is it to fear the unknown when the mind is here to discover it? That's the whole point of life. Why do people do new things, right? What's the psychology of novelty? To be someone else, I shouldn't say someone else, to see another angle to how the world can be to the original viewer, which is the moment being present. And in simplicity, God is everywhere. In complexity, you know, truth is infinitely scattered. You know, there was a time where I thought compassion was corny. You know, this is a while back when I was like, I don't know, 16 or something. You know, I thought, okay, compassion in the concrete jungle, it's like, get out, man. You know, how can we be compassionate in a cruel world? Then I realized the most advanced beings are so advanced that even if they are compassionate, like there's no demonstration of power. The only way we know that there isn't powerful beings on earth is because there's external expressions of it. You know, it's like an invisible mind is trying to show visibly how able it is, but what's the point of the invisible viewer? What's the point of an unknown viewer looking out through our eyes before we clothe it in the language that has to be the world, you know? You know, from a religious context, it's like regardless of how much man sins, the idea of redemption is that the world can walk differently. As long as human beings have access to learn from the dimensions of their life, they can be free beyond those dimensions. Really, it's kind of like we're birds, right? And when the person is still and silent, the bird is like in the sky looking in the whole forest. The moment the person speaks and moves, the bird has landed on a branch. You know, and pretty much what I'm doing on this talk is I feel like I'm leaping. I'm leaping to how vision extends. That means if there is truth, if the truth is intelligent, then that intelligence will consider our intelligence as a companion, because we don't know what else there is to it. You know, there's a Sufi quote, or it's a hadith, I don't know, it's authentication level, but it's this quote where, let me Google it actually. I don't know how to say it, but here, I think it was something in the lines of God was unknown, and so God created the world so it could be known. It was something in these lines, the geometry of that sentence. Okay, so it's as if nature, consciousness, is the effect of something that had a previous desire. Right, like this is where Buddhism is like some next level psychological, like I don't know how a Buddhist psychologist would like behave, but it would be very fascinating. Like, you know, now is the best time for all these, you know, Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist saints to kind of, you know, try to create bridges to, you know, the psychological departments of all universities. I think that's really what universities should be focused on, right? Being fascinated by how the eyes of the world is moving in all dimensions. What is education in an unknown world? How to pilot through the unknown. And there is no certainty when the objective reality, we're like a candle, and our minds and our souls are kind of like the glow of the candle in the moment. And this candle, at some point, like after 100 years, it doesn't exist anymore, right? So we are like an rare opportunity for nature to move itself in a way that had never existed before, you know. Consciousness is very fascinating. nature of the mind. In certain schools of thought, it's like what the mind is the exoteric dimension of truth, and the soul is the esoteric dimension. Right? It's kind of like, or think of it this way: the body is the exoteric, the soul is the esoteric, and then mind is a bridge between the exoteric and the esoteric. It's another way of saying it's the mind is the connecting point of the surface of the ocean with its whole depths. French existentialists, they just saw the essence as being the being, right? So essence is being. So in certain schools of thought, they don't see the surface and the depths view, in existentialism. But for me, Mysterianism is cooler than that. It's not just about the limits of our existence, because we're an energy that can activate. It's like we're fascinated by the limitless till the end of time. I mean, who is not fascinated by the unknown? Right, but it's if the unknown is gentle to our free will, we love it. If the unknown is, savage and abrupt, it's like we dislike it. Imagine like an extraterrestrial landing on Earth and just shaking hands with the leaders of humanity. I mean, like, hey, what's up, guys? We took archetypes from your planet and we made it into ourselves. We'll be like, yo, these aliens are super chill, it's like, sure, let's establish, intergalactic communications and whatnot, But imagine the alien just appears out of nowhere and it looks like some sort of fictional monster, just, futuristic monster or something. And we'd be like, okay, that's too much, It's all potential, dear viewers. The whole point of the mind is that the world can move faster than we move in. Like the inner realms can move faster than how we actually live in accordance to them in the outer realms, how we actualize them in the outer realms. What I'm trying to say by mankind realizing its truth's greatest companion is in some sense realizing what's the point of truth being intelligent. What's the point of intelligence? It's interaction. Right, so now it's kind of like wondering if there was an intelligence to the whole world, let's call it God, right? It's as if, what's the purpose of ultimate intelligence? What's the purpose of ultimate being? There is no purpose to it, so the limitation dissolves. It's like, mysticism is like a vitamin C tablet in the water, I think when humanity can be compassionate to the space, it's kind of like honoring the advanced being of the moment. That's really it. I have found that the smartest thing that the intellect can do is to abide, or in some sense realize before we do anything, the moment is being. We don't have to do anything for the moment to be. They call this Satchidananda. Usually when a person notices how the moment is just being, bliss arises. You start feeling waves of bliss, and it's like you reach a point where you're like, no way, the purpose of consciousness is existence. It's like an invisible, an invisible director is moving a visible actor, and the visible actor is trying to define this invisible director, right? Based on itself, not realizing it may be beyond itself. Like truth may be beyond the human archetype. We need philosophers to go, we need advanced communicators to go and resolve that, We are very blessed as species to have imagination, because it is our imagination that has made skyscrapers, space stations. It is the mind of man which is a way of saying the Earth wanted to get an out-of-body experience, an out-of-planet experience. We are not just in a world, we are the explorers of the world. What else in this universal sector can use consciousness to comprehend the world? Like all the other species, to me, the lesser species, I could just call them the sleeping species. They're all sleeping, you know? A person being kind to, like, let's say a bird, right? That is like a lesser species, or being kind to a cat or a dog. It's as if you're valuing that moment in accordance to what it is being, right? There's no expectation, right? Not there's no expectation, but there's no humanized expectation, right? The way that the child learns language, there's something so fascinating about it, that it's like you log into a character that was being, it's like the idea of ourself doesn't have really a beginning and ending. It just appeared. We don't know how it appeared, but like when I look back at my earliest memories, it's literally a moment where I was a person to myself. I have an earlier view of just being sight in a moment before even knowing my name and personality, but it's just the awareness of being. This is it. The simplicity of the moment frees the inner realms, and then the person can trust the complexity. What else can I say? In a changing world, we're left as unknown explorers. The advanced civilization is the greatest exploration. To be compassionate to space is to honor presence instantaneously, and I don't know what else I can say. It's like the person's like, I don't know if I love or hate the world, but I'm being it. I'm being present with the world, right? That presence, it's as if consciousness is universally present, but the body is planetary, in a planetary context, present. Now, I want to share something with the viewers before I end off. It's something about the Kardashev scale. I talk about advanced civilizations in a Mr.Within way, but there's other people who have thought from a different angle. They've thought about some of the stuff I talk about. Here we go. If the viewers look at, half of the Armin's face on the screen, the Kardashev scale is like this vision of types of civilization. I'm just going to read it for the viewers that may be like driving and listening to this. Type 1 civilization capable of controlling the entire energy of its planet. Type 2 civilization capable of controlling the entire energy of its host star and travels through the solar system. Type 3 civilization capable of controlling the energy at the scale of its entire host galaxy. Type 4 civilization capable of using energy at the scale of the universe, create galaxies, manipulate space-time. This is the Kardashev scale I'm reading for the viewers. Type 5 civilization capable of using energy at the scale of the multiverse. Travel to parallel universes and simulate universes. Type 6 civilization that exists beyond time and space or in higher dimensions. So, to be honest, I don't know how deeply Kardashev envisioned, but like it eventually, all conceptualization leads to an inconceivable point. Like there's no person there, like perfection is kind of like there's no perfection, but when you can't do anything else, it's perfect. You have reached a sort of conclusion of a sort, So, to get to a sort of type what do you call it, type 6 civilization, right? That's something where, how would I say, that's when we won't be conceptual entities. That means the moment we realize we're beyond time and space, the attention is going to be like, what have I been doing here, right? It's like the person's like, oh my god, I've been a multidimensional being this whole time, so how have I ever been offended by anything in nature? When the world is changing, we forget it's a changing world, and then emotions, act like despots. Being compassionate to space is being compassionate to where life is happening and those who trust the world. The world will trust you and reveal itself. That's how mysticism works. It's not just the outer appearance and trust and behavior. It's also how the mind is happening to itself and how much it has realized that freedom of identity is prior to the freedom of identification, not dismissing the identity, not devaluing the identity, not fighting over the identity, but just realizing that in a simple way, it's an organism. And it's an organism that is self-simulating, but there's a value to its self-simulation and its patterns. But at the same time, there's so many ways the future is going to look at the world that we're in now, right, that we would have never imagined. So right now, as I give these talks, I know that the future generations will be speaking about things inconceivable to me now, but I'm trying to surprise the future generations by suggesting in some sense how far I could notice. Because what's the purpose of the mind? Our minds are a technology. We are the user of that consciousness is the user of the technology, right? It's as if, what's the value of imagination based on what you do with it, right? For somebody, imagination could be truth, right? Imagine somebody thinks of this concept of I don't know, a light blue glowing phoenix in the sky, flying, at night, right? The paradox of archetypal freedom. How can we be free if we are considering the limitation to exist? Could there have been a way that every human being could have looked at their life and the significance of the problems of their life were nothing compared to the great solutions the future generations will uncover? The future generations, the whole style is that the newer generations fascinate the older generations. And then it's pretty much you're in the fascinating archetype. Then as you I think when the person retires, they're in the fascinating archetype, of getting more fascinated by the world. Regardless of how our eyes move, our eyes are here, and that's a sort of supreme value. The meaning of life is not just what we do, it's what our species does. And, aside from that, there's also, what is looking, how would I say it? Qualia is its own mystery as well in philosophy. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. Don't fear the unknown. And if you do fear the unknown, wonder about what self is fearing what, right? If the unknown is unknown, we can't know if it's something to fear or not, right? A person doesn't know their ability, but they have the ability, right? Somebody doesn't know if they could lift a 5-pound weight, right? What if they have the ability to lift a 5-pound weight? Now, what would it imply in regards to lifting subjects beyond their, beyond their definitions? Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. I hope this episode was helpful. Much blessings and namaste. Rise, mankind, rise. The moment is the great hall that we have all arrived to. We have all arrived in the great hall of consciousness. Now, the hidden potential to every moment, the idea is that before having the idea of going to paradise, we attempt to build paradise on earth. We attempt to see what the most advanced being, right? Whether you think it's the most advanced God's, or the great, it's like God created the human, and the human wants to see how great God's creation was, right? Or whether you have a secular perspective, you're this evolutionary animal, 4.5 billion years, it's still stuck around, and why, and what's the potential, and how far will the species walk, in this world of ours, beyond the names that we believe to be truth. The inconceivable is present, the simultaneous observer of the visible and invisible. That's the presence of unknown. When you experience the presence of the unknown and you can trust it, then reality was from the beginning flawless. Thanks for listening, guys. Much blessings.